All right, thank you, Lacey. Thanks for joining us this morning for the latest installment in the Virtual Access Series from Downtown Seattle Association. My name is Felix Bonnell, and today we're shining a spotlight on arts and culture downtown. We have a terrific panel for this task. I'll introduce each of them in just a moment. The holiday season is here, and the role of arts and culture in downtown Seattle takes on an even more obvious place in the hearts and minds of families around the Northwest. But many of us already know arts and culture is a year-round engine of economic activity and a critical part of Seattle's identity as a place where creativity and ingenuity of all kinds is valued, elevated, and fostered. Now, it wasn't always this way. I don't expect anybody remembers when Sir Thomas Beecham was lured from England to serve as director of the Seattle Symphony back in the 1940s. His tenure was brief and painful, and when he left town, he infamously called Seattle a cultural dustbin. A mean tweet before such a thing had been invented. Now, the 1962 World's Fair changed that perception for good with an astounding array of world-class performances and the creation or upgrades to venues at what became Seattle Center. And that place became an incubator for arts and culture, the results of which far exceeded anyone's hopes and dreams during that big fair 62 years ago. Now, the Goodwill Arts Festival in 1990 provided a similar boost. The exploding theater scene that followed in that decade, it was just as important as the rise of grunge and film community and the burgeoning literary community too, and the new SAM, private investment in places like the Paramount, and all sorts of great things happening. Then the internet came along and the tech boom. Even more attention for Seattle meant that things like rising rents and the full spectrum of realities were coming to a city which I think it's safe to say is no longer vulnerable to criticism or insults from someone like Sir Thomas Beecham. But here we are. It's 2024. The pandemic is over. Lingering challenges from before, during, and after the pandemic still must be addressed for the arts and culture sector to secure its future in downtown Seattle. And we are joined by panelists who are most qualified to have this important conversation. Josh LaBelle is Executive Director of Seattle Theater Group. He's been with STG for more than 2 decades, overseeing the operations of the historic Paramount, Moore, and Neptune theaters. STG presents more than 600 performances each year and many education and community programs. Josh also serves as board chair for Inspire Washington and is board president for the Performing Arts Venue Alliance. Scott Stuhlen is the Ilsley Ball Nordstrom director and CEO at Seattle Art Museum. Scott assumed his role at SAM this past July. Prior to that, he spent 8 years as president and CEO of the Philbrook Museum of Art in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and nearly 3 years at the Indianapolis Museum of Art. Scott is also a board member of the Association of Art Museum Directors. Ellen Walker became executive director of Pacific Northwest Ballet in 2014, but this is her 22nd season with PNB. Ellen manages an operating budget of $30 million and more than 400 employees. As PNB's Director of Marketing and Communications from 2003 to 2014, she oversaw significant audience development initiatives. Ellen is Vice President of the Inspire Washington Board and is a board member and council chair of Dance USA. All right. Now, we have some questions we prepared in advance. You can also put questions in the chat box or the question box during the program. We pay attention to those and bring those forward as they fit into this arc of this conversation we're going to have for roughly the next hour. Before we begin all these virtual access sessions, it's become a beloved Seattle tradition to start with a few data points. Okay, here we go. Downtown is home to more than 1/3 of the city's arts and cultural spaces and 2/3 of Seattle's arts sector jobs. In raw numbers, there are 5,126 arts jobs in downtown Seattle. The arts sector comprises 10.3% of Washington State's GDP, representing more than $72 billion. And Washington State comes in at just 39th in the nation for per capita spending by arts agencies. And finally, the King County Doors Open levy, which was approved in 2023, provides $782 million for arts, heritage, and science over the next 7 years. All right. I think to get things started, we want to talk about the DSA Arts and Culture Report, which was released earlier, and the group that put it together, this Arts and Culture Committee. Ellen, you serve on that committee. Can you kind of tell us about the nexus of that, the genesis, and what that represents?
Well, the DSA has done really great work at looking at what it would mean to invest in arts and culture in order to help to revitalize downtown Seattle. And so they had 4 areas of focus. The area of focus I am working on is around funding for the sector. There's also things to expedite permitting for arts organizations to more quickly develop downtown. There's a really excellent branding and awareness campaign that's being worked on, and other areas of work just to make sure that the sector, the huge interdependent sector, because it's organizations of all sizes and disciplines, is supported in establishing a strong and vibrant presence downtown.
And we'll come back to some of those specific elements of that document and that plan and that committee. I think it'd also be really good to start out just kind of with go around the horn and talk about the current status of the organizations that each of you represent, and then sort of extrapolate in general about the bigger picture about the arts and culture community and sector in downtown Seattle. Scott, would you like to start us off on that? You're the new guy in town, so let's put you on the spot and have you tell us everything we need to know about the Seattle Art Museum here in 2024.
Yeah, and it's interesting coming in from the outside and maybe having that different perspective. I've been here for about 3 months now at SAM, but I can kind of give you an assessment. We're almost fully back as far as attendance goes from the pandemic, but there's a lot of added costs that are part of that too that are really challenging us budget-wise. So we are, looking at a deficit going into this year, and that isn't directly related just to people coming in the door. It's all the realities of dealing with inflation and rising labor costs, and costs of even putting on art shows has gone up considerably. So we're just dealing with a different reality than we were 5 years ago. So I think that's something that every cultural organization and nearly every business is dealing with too, but we're not immune from it. And I think it's one of those things, sometimes thinking the arts sit outside of it, and we definitely don't. So that's going to force us to think about different ways of how we have funding coming in, and funding coming in from multiple sources, and not being kind of, you're really stuck on one source being able to answer that. It's looking at a lot of different strategies. And for me, coming in new, looking at new strategies that maybe we haven't done before. So it's a multi-layered thing.
And I mean, dumb question, but when you have a deficit, what does that mean? How does that translate for the public experience or the community?
We try to not have it come over into the public experience, but if you continue to have a deficit going forward, it means is less shows, it means less art that we have, less open hours, less staff, less ways that we can support the community and do things that are out there. We can't do the big, amazing things that we do at the museum. We don't have the resources to do it. So there's so many other organizations that are dependent on the big arts organizations to do what they do too. So it's all interdependent in this. So if one big organization is failing, it actually hurts others outside of that too. So it really is a big ecosystem, and it will hurt businesses, bars, restaurants, hotels, other things. If there's not things to come and do here, and if we can't offer and be able to have the amazing exhibits that we have, all of that will be hurt from that. So really for us, it's looking at ways we can't continue to have a deficit year after year going forward. So we need to find ways that we can close that gap.
Okay. Josh, what about you, Seattle Theater Group?
So Seattle Theater Group, in a similar space as the Art Museum, we have been trending up in our attendance, and I'm paying close attention to where we were pre-pandemic, pre-closure, and I think our high attendance, our high watermark was 1.1 million people in 2019. And we just closed the fiscal year 24 with 1,059,000 people, which was a 10 or 12% increase from the previous year. So that's the good news. The more immediate good news is we have a record-setting Wicked on the stage right now that will have more than 92,000 people coming through. And I think we're also a little lucky here in that the film is coming out and we have it on stage. So there's Wicked everywhere you go. That doesn't hurt. That helps a lot. That said, similar to Sam, expenses are higher, probably a good 20% higher than they've been since we started coming back. And it's we've always had this attitude at Seattle Theater Group that growth sort of going for it is a good sustainability strategy. And it does feel extra challenging right now to buoy that kind of attitude with extra fundraising, because there's certain zones in our sector that we've got to find a way of inspiring greater support from, notably the corporate sector and the city of Seattle itself, that I feel needs to do a much stronger job in showing support downtown.
So wait, when you say going for it, you mean like what, taking risks on different productions or things that you aren't necessarily sure things or surefire bets, or what do you mean by going for it?
Yeah, organizations like the three of ours here, I think we take risk every day. There's people on our staff that figure out what are we going to be doing, 6 months from now, a year and a half from now, and they're laying plans that are all risk associated. And if we believe, I think that growth is a good sustainability strategy, we've also got to have the belief that we could do so within the realm of some financial sustainability as well. And so I guess I'm trying to answer your question by saying, like, at this point in time, I think most organizations are struggling raising more contributed revenue. It may be fine that Wicked's doing well, or in the ballet's standpoint, maybe the Nutcracker's having a good year. However, if the contributed revenue is stagnant, it's going to be really hard for us to continue to grow or just stay safe and sustainable today because of these rising expenses. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, in terms of contributed, I mean, this is a part that's, I don't know, might be esoteric for some people in the audience. I'm not sure. This notion of how a nonprofit cultural organization actually functions, that it's not just the ticket price that's covering all the expenses. Obviously, there's donors, and historically, going back for decades, nothing's been possible without having corporate donors, individual members, subscribers, and everything like that. I mean, even in spite of the economic headwinds of the pandemic and the Great Recession 15 years ago, Seattle generally had a fair amount of private wealth, a fair amount of corporate wealth. So what is it about the contributed income? Why are you not seeing the contributed income that you would have expected to be seeing at this point? Or where's the disconnect?
Ellen, do you have a thought on that one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in. I read a report that talked about this very thing, particularly with the corporate sector. And that this was an emerging sentiment over the last decade or so, that corporations sort of associate arts and arts philanthropy with luxury. There's this sort of very tired narrative around arts being nice but not necessary. And obviously in a city like ours, we have a lot of competing priorities. And so I think this narrative of let's let individual donors take care of these organizations is very, very pervasive. And the same is true. I mean, Doors Open King County is phenomenal. It is transformative support and a transformative affirmation of the power of this sector.
Pause there for a second. Can you explain what it is for someone who might not know what that is, or maybe they didn't know even that about King County Arts Funding? Can you give you just a quick little tutorial on what that actually is?
So Doors Open King County is a tax initiative that infuses much needed support into the sector across King County. About 700 arts, culture, science, and heritage organizations can apply for funds through For Culture, which administers the program. And this was vetted through and approved by the King County Council, and the Regional Policy Committee had a lot to do with it as well in terms of vetting and reviewing this legislation. But it is a way to support the work that organizations like ours do for the community in education, in accessibility, in equity work, in many, many ways in which we contribute to the vitality and the health of this county. And so we had a terrific champion in Dow Constantine and the King County Council as a whole. And so the initiative passed last year, about a year ago. And it's rolling. So funding hasn't been given out yet, but it's very much hoped that this will help organizations stay sustainable, because there are very, very few of us who have any COVID support dollars left. In the performing arts sector, subscriptions are way down generally. There is a pervasive and damaging perception about safety downtown. And so people may just stay away. There isn't a lot of media coverage of the arts, especially on TV. And so you don't have a counter narrative. So there's lots of things sort of working against the sector. And yet, the arts and culture sector does incredible, creative, important, inspiring, engaging educational work every day.
Let's talk about the numbers of subscribers dropping. And again, for just to give a little tutorial, we have ticket sales. I think most people understand what a single ticket purchase is, but a subscriber, tell us why that's so critical to an arts organization and why those numbers are down.
Well, first of all, that revenue comes in first in a season. And so it sustains the organization in
Oh, so they're paying up front before the season begins. You get a big chunk of cash. Okay, gotcha. Okay.
Season tickets to the Huskies or the Seahawks, same principle. People tend to be closer to the organization, so they are more likely to add a contribution to their season ticket purchase. They are great advocates. In our case, season subscribers are the first to support the works we're doing to evolve the art form of ballet, because they're really curious and they're really inspired by new work. They're very inspired by our diverse company of dancers on stage, so they stay close, but there are fewer of them. And I'm sure that's true for many organizations. To answer your other question, Felix, I think people just got new habits during the pandemic. In our case, we also have a digital program. And so there are people who may not feel safe coming downtown or live in another state now, and they just watch online.
At some point, I wanted to ask the question. This is like a perfect segue, and now because I still want to hear from you, Ellen, about kind of the current status of PNB and everything. The same way we heard from Scott and from Josh. Given the pandemic has, it's passed, I still feel like we're in this post-pandemic period, which is a dumb name, but I think that's accurate. How much of what we're seeing now is directly attributed to the pandemic versus how much was was subscriber numbers already falling off just because of changing demographics and changing culture, or? I mean, what is it? How much of, I guess I'm trying to ask is how much of this can we address versus how much there are these bigger cultural waves that are, beyond our immediate control?
Josh, do you want to grab that?
Well, yeah, Felix, I don't think that there's a giant wave of people changing their interest in coming out.
Well, I mean, like with Netflix versus movie theaters. That's something like those kinds of comparisons of more choices, like Ellen said a moment ago, new habits.
Yeah, new habits. I mean, certainly people are buying their tickets closer in to the actual performances themselves, and so that can give a few of us the extra spilkas. But I frankly kind of reject the notion that that there's a big forever change happening in arts and culture. I think actually that people need arts and culture today more than ever. And there's a real case to be built around mental health, around economic vitality that the arts brings us. So I feel like, with the right kind of support, this sector is still well poised to do even more for our communities and this downtown region than we're doing today. Again, we just experienced a 10 to 12% increase in attendance from one year to the other. It's possible. It's harder work than ever. It's also more rewarding work than ever.
Now, in terms of making that case, I think everyone on the panel that we understand all these different nuances and subtleties of what the arts community represents, the critical part of its role in downtown being vibrant for decades in the past and into the future. But Ellen, you also mentioned sort of the perception challenges around public safety. And those perception challenges come up a lot in these DSA conversations, these virtual access conversations about many aspects of downtown vitality and that changing media environment where you don't have arts reporters really anywhere anymore. I guess maybe at public radio and a little bit at the newspapers. So in terms of that perception, let me just drill down on one particular part of that perception, because you mentioned Doors Open and the King County Council and County Executive Constantine. Have their actions made the Seattle City Council and Mayor Harold jealous and inspired them to want to do something equally as cool within the city limits? Or how come King County Council understands the value of that kind of funding, but maybe the City Council doesn't? Or is that a fair way to characterize that? Is that a mischaracterization? Anyone can answer that. I don't care. Was there a question there? Or am I just ranting again? I'm sorry. No.
Well, wouldn't it be amazing if there was a conversation happening right now at the city level, like, hey, let's jump on this bandwagon. Imagine if we amplify this investment with a huge investment of our own. Now, the city has massive expenses, and it's very expensive to run any kind of business in this city. But I can't speak for Seattle City Council, but I think it would be amazing to recognize the impact of something like Doors Open and get on board.
I'm trying to understand why the county gets it and understands it. And the county's a bigger, it's obviously a bigger footprint than the city of Seattle, but and different character of the suburbs and the unincorporated areas. But somehow those elected leaders understood exactly what we're talking about this morning, the vital connection between supporting the nonprofit arts and culture sector and all these other dividends that pay off in every other part of the economy and the landscape. I'm just wondering, because it feels like if there truly is an arts community, if you guys get together and talk with each other at times other than a DSA panel or the Arts and Culture Committee, how do you change that how do you address the problem and articulate it in a way that inspires the right people?
Felix, it's worse even than the city doesn't get it. It's a worse situation than that. I think, Ellen, what was it, a couple of years ago, the city actually made some drastic changes to funding patterns. Some of that was really good. They widened the pie in terms of who was participating, what organizations are participating in the city's funding. However, in doing so, they did that at the expense of a lot of large and mid-sized organizations. So I can speak for Seattle Theater Group, but I'm pretty confident that Sam and PMB are in the same spot. The city actually reduced our funding by 90%. You heard it right, 90%. And I've been kind of sitting here waiting for the new Seattle Arts and Cultural Office to address that and align with a lot of the language we're hearing from city leadership about the importance of arts and culture downtown. I hear a lot of words, and I don't see a lot of action. We took a 90% cut. Seattle Theater Group is I think, getting $6,000 of support from the city of Seattle for our just regular sustained support. And again, we're above 1 million people. So I think it's worse than the city just doesn't get it. They've taken regressive action in terms of the economic vitality of arts and culture.
And I mean, I think it's obviously it's critical to identify the issues and the problems. And I mean, but that it's also critical to take that beyond the step of complaining or identifying the problem and finding a solution. I still want to get to Ellen for an update on PNB, and we're going to come to you. I'm going to save that in case we get hit a dead spot in the conversation, and we'll go to Ellen. No, just kidding. But Scott, you're a new guy.
Yeah.
You're from a different part of the country where culture isn't necessarily. We talked about a little bit of this in the preliminary conversation, because there's other parts of the country where civic officials understand they have to invest in culture and arts because otherwise there wouldn't be anything. Seattle, we have this, we like to think of ourselves as this hip cosmopolitan city with all this naturally occurring, small batch artisanal culture and arts organizations. But in the Midwest or where you were in Oklahoma, it's a whole different story, right? And the public level of public investment is completely different.
It is, and it's interesting coming in too, just making these assumptions of coming into Seattle and coming into Washington about support that would be here that actually isn't true. And there's also the opposite of kind of perceptions of Oklahoma, for example, of not having any arts and culture, and there's some truth to that too. But
I understand you have a basketball team though, but never
yes,
mind.
that is true. I had nothing to do with that, but yes. But I think part of it is, just to give you an example, Oklahoma has 2.5 times more per capita giving towards the arts than the state of Washington. And so I think that
So giving, do you mean private giving, private donors?
Public.
Okay, public support. Okay,
Public
gotcha.
support.
Okay, gotcha.
So public support and private dollars are a whole different thing, but the private support, there's 2.5 times more than Washington. I also spent most of my career in Minnesota. Minnesota's 20 times more. And Minnesota's at the top, towards the top of that too. And there's a whole lot of reasons for that. And the part of it is they put some other tax initiatives in place there, somewhat similar to Doors Open. But I think part of it, and I saw being in Minnesota, kind of some of this play out over time. One of the things to be cautious with a program like a Doors Open is that money comes out and there's a perception then that the problem is solved. And it actually can have giving go away in some other sectors, whether that be corporate or even individual giving, because it's being handled in this other area. So it can be one of those things that has the net effect of it is either break even or even sometimes a negative. So it's one of those things where the communication is so important in this, and we make sure that some of those perceptions are not being spun in the wrong direction, that suddenly this problem is solved. I just wanted to mention one other thing, kind of going back to kind of the constituency changing. There is a lot of changes that are happening, both in the demographics of who's giving to our institutions and who's coming. We're having to change a lot about kind of how we're approaching audiences to bring them in a different way than we've done before. And we're all doing that on various levels. But we also have a lot of donors that used to give philanthropically. They would just give every year and we could count on that. That donor base is becoming more transactional. So we're really having to think about what we're having on our schedule that year that they may want to contribute to. That completely changes kind of how you budget and plan going forward. And it's going to be something of changing how we've been setting up some of our fundraising models. So there's a lot of things working all at once inside of this.
So you're saying actual individual donors are changing. It's not just a demographic shift of those annual givers aging out and going away.
Correct. Yeah,
it's the actual
changing, because what's happening often is you even have giving that maybe the giving's going in out as their kids that have that money that is there, and they may have a whole different kind of approach to how they want to give, very different approach about kind of how they're spreading that money around, and it maybe not are as attached to, sometimes we would have people for 30 years who would only give to an organization. It's not working exactly like that anymore. So there's some positives of that, is spreading around the pool, so you're not dependent on only a couple of donors to be able to do that. But it takes a lot more staff time, labor, the infrastructure in order to manage more donors for the same amount of money.
Okay. And I want to get back to something I said a moment ago about like whether you guys talk to each other offline. And, there's this DSA committee around arts and culture. And in the past, I worked at the Chamber of Commerce 30 years ago. That's where I first met you, Ellen, when I was working for Business Volunteers for the Arts. Is there an arts community in Seattle? And I want to use that also to talk about this notion of large, medium, small size organizations and this notion of an ecology or an ecosystem. Is there, if the arts community, quote unquote, wanted to do something to change perception, to reach elected officials, to address these things around individual donors or subscribers dropping, the numbers dropping, does that community exist, and is it able to be sort of marshaled to take action?
Yes, it absolutely exists. And that's why I smiled before when you say, do we talk? Because we talk. And I think we are a uniquely collaborative community. And Scott, you would be better positioned to say that than me, because I've been in this sector my entire career in Seattle. But I think most of us feel that one of us doing well creates a better chance for all of us doing well, and that people who buy arts experiences buy more of them. We also have a CEO roundtable of arts organizations of every size and discipline. We convene once a month. We have an advocacy organization, and it's statewide, but it's really effective. And we mentioned it before, Inspire Washington. Josh is the chair. And it's a really effective coalition to uplift all those benefits created by arts, culture, science, and heritage. So, and Inspire Washington, there's a straight line between that group and the passage of Doors Open King County. So yes, to answer your question, we talk all the time.
Okay, well, let's use that to give you the segue to talk about the current status of PNB, so we can finally let you speak about that.
Well, those who don't know, PNB is Pacific Northwest Ballet. We're in our 52nd season. We're about a week away from opening the Nutcracker, which is our annual holiday tradition. And I'm sure most people probably realize there would be no ballet in America without the Nutcracker. It supports the sector, our part of the sector. It supports everything we do at PNB. And it is often the first entry point for anybody to experience this art form, for children to see other children on stage, and then they express interest in attending our school. And it's incredible. It's really, really important to all of us. And, you know, Josh talked about the mental health benefits of the arts. We saw that so clearly. We had a program that was opened right before the election and closed the weekend after. And ticket sales skyrocketed between those 2 weekends because people know that the inspiration and the human connection and the calm that they get in one of our venues is needed. It's really, really needed. And so we're really happy to be opening Nutcracker and to offer that all again, because it's a wonderful escape and a way to experience community.
Okay. Now, Josh, you touched on this a little bit. I think this notion of, if a nonprofit arts organization is doing well in the neighborhood, the businesses around that organization will do. It's not just, it's not a silo. There's an obvious direct connection between your success and the success of the community. And there's a question from Sarah Rathbone asks us in the question box. When we talk about creative economy as a slice of GDP, 10.8% for Washington, we should note a large segment of that is generated by for-profit creative businesses. I would love to see greater discussion and integration of small for-profit creative businesses and nonprofit arts entities in conversation, especially as it relates to downtown economic revitalization. There's a relationship between bringing/attracting audience participation and extending their spending downtown at restaurants, galleries, bars, shops, etc. So how does that fit into what we're talking about this morning?
First of all, thank you for that question and that point, because I think there's a lot of work and a lot of headway and possibility in front of us around greater collaboration in the nonprofit arts and cultural sector and the for-profit cultural sector. I think we share more in common than we have being different. And that said, I think there's examples of that, already happening. The company that's sitting on the Paramount stage right now is a LLC, a U.S. based for-profit LLC that we're essentially in contract with to be able to help their tour come across the U.S. and being Wicked. And to give you a sense of scale, that partnership has, I think, 76 people in town right now that are staying at hotels and here for an entire month. So Felix kind of tying back to your comment about what any of us do to help provide some vitality in downtown. I think it can often be beyond just bringing customers to downtown who will wind up spending money on parking and restaurants and hotels. It's also literally the artists who are often traveling and visiting artists that also help with hotels in the very same way that the convention center is doing awesome work. And you all probably can feel the difference when a large convention is downtown. Suddenly, like, we've got people here and they're walking around on the streets, and it sort of reminds you of yesterday, But I think there's also some cool stuff, going back to that for-profit thing, and maybe Scott could comment on this. But I've noticed some new funky museums showing up in downtown. And I'm not sure they're nonprofit or for-profit. I don't necessarily distinguish the difference sometimes. But I feel like this is a trend and this is a good thing.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, I think there is more of those, whether it's, they're in various cities and we've got a few here downtown. The more the better. The more that there is things to do, the more that it draws people down to be able to have different types of experiences. I think that helps everybody. And it really, if you have a good experience here, then maybe you'll try something else and try another, activity, another cultural organization, whether it's a for-profit or nonprofit. I think a lot of the audience doesn't make that distinction or necessarily even care as far as that's concerned. But the more people we can draw, into a city, the better. And I think that's only going to help us as we can kind of build on one another. And I think this goes to that collaboration. How can we think about even marketing together? Can we get further ahead on things and thinking about certain themes or certain things that are happening in the city at a time and really have more power as a unit together? So I think that's where kind of coming back to the more that we are talking with one another, sharing ideas, planning ahead on things and thinking about ways that we can work with both of our, for-profit and nonprofit collaborators here, the better. And there's a lot of that coming up. That was one of the attractions of coming here to Seattle, is knowing some of the things on the horizon. And, with the waterfront opening and all these other activities that are happening, World Cup, how are we going to take advantage of that? How are we going to work together and not just expect it to organically happen, but actually make it happen? I want to really be here as part of, instead of just talking about it, that we're putting some of this into action and seizing that opportunity.
Do we, Scott, do we here in Seattle talk too much about the arts and not put our money where our mouth is in terms of individuals or the city? Or, I mean, you're the new guy. We won't hold it against you. Tell us, slap us in the face. Tell us the truth.
I think that could be true, but I think you could actually say that probably about every city in the country too. So I think it's not unique to Seattle, but I think there's a lot at times of talk without actually putting some of the things into action. And I think this is part of it, is really picking what we can do and let's jump in. I think we are all in a field of taking risks. And this is one of those areas. Can we apply that same creative effort to whether it's marketing or really thinking about how we're going and making our case civically for funding?
Yeah, and part of this we talked about a little bit is this notion of perception, and I think about all the activation strategies for downtown. So many of them rely on arts and cultural related activities, and filling vacant storefronts with arts related businesses or nonprofit groups and everything. And getting back to the Arts and Culture Committee of DSA, I think one of the aspects of that is a communications or a perception changing part. And I was intrigued by this notion of Seattle as a global hub, sort of this big reach, big branding effort, which I guess could go a long way to this addressing these perception issues. Ellen, is that something you can talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we are a global hub. We've always had, there is no world-class city on earth that doesn't have a thriving cultural sector at its heart and as part of its identity. Seattle is that too. This sector, you said it at the beginning, Felix. It's always been highly respected. Even just being out on this corner of the U.S., Seattle has been known. Part of the reason why we have such an innovative, creative economy, including software and tech, is because of the way the arts were embedded in the identity of this city. And I grew up in that identity, and that's why I work in this sector now. And I saw all of that coming up in Seattle. But the work that Randy Engstrom and his committee are doing in terms of that sort of marketing and branding and invitation work to bring people to Seattle is about positioning Seattle and its cultural assets as a destination in and of itself. The waterfront and the redevelopment of the waterfront is included in that. But just reasserting our identity as an important destination for arts and culture. And the truth is, revitalization downtown simply does not materialize without investment in this sector. It just cannot happen. And so that recognition and that truth needs to be taken very seriously by people in positions of influence and ability to invest.
Okay. How do we do that? Let's put all the niceties aside. We've spent 40 minutes on the preliminaries and the nice and stuff. I'm partially kidding, but I think most people listening, I know everyone here on the panel, we get that. We know how critical arts are. We, from a young age, either from our privilege or for whatever reason, we were exposed to this and we got to take part and go witness live performance or great visual arts or dance. I mean, part of it's a demographic thing, part of it's a socioeconomic thing. But there's things have changed. There's headwinds. There's changes in the way we think of ourselves as Americans. There's so much stuff is in flux before the pandemic. These global things. How do we take the aspirations of great organizations like yours, the small organizations, the emerging organizations? How do we get all that and communicate that and convince the people who have the power over the investment, the power over contributions, the power of buying ticket? I mean, we only have about 20 minutes left, but this is sort of the big question. Like, what are the headwinds? What's stopping this sector from being recognized for what it does for all of downtown revitalization, for what it's always? I mean, I feel like I really want to kind of just tear it away. Like, what do we need to do? How can people help? What needs to happen?
So, Felix, I'll take that question and also tie it back to the notion of Seattle as a greater and stronger cultural hub, and it comes back down to artists, making sure that artists can live here and make a living here. And I feel like there needs to be greater investment in industry infrastructure. So a dancer, a musician, a theater artist can have an easier time doing nothing but their work and not have to juggle 3 or 4 different jobs to make a living here. And going back to, I think it was Sarah's question in the chat earlier about the for-profit zones of the cultural sector. It feels like the film and television business is ripe for greater infrastructure growth in Seattle. King County's made some headwinds. Thank you, Dow Constantine and Kate Becker, for helping to establish. I think there's a place down on Harbor Island that we're seeing more things being filmed there. But boy, I may have been here now, I think since 96 or something. But I used to make a living as a musician in Los Angeles. And I can't say it was easy, but there was plenty of work, lots of work for this little drummer. And I think if we want to really make the change, we've got to look to what our local artists need, and hopefully have some conversations with some major television and film producers. Lionsgate, by way of example, is building, I think, a $250 million soundstage out in Newark, New Jersey, in collaboration with the New Jersey Performing Arts Center. Wow. That's awesome. And I think half the money is put up by a combination of the city and the state. And we're really going to see, I bet you anything, they're really going to see some great economic benefit there.
Yeah.
It's that kind of stuff that we've got to have the courage to take the risk with.
Scott, were you going to say something, or Ellen, you going to say something?
Go ahead, Scott.
I'll just say, as far as film and TV, and this is one thing I can actually share from Oklahoma, is they did make an effort to invest in film and television. They have sound stages that have been built there, major motion pictures that were filmed there, because from a state level, there is advocated for billions of dollars that were invested not only in creating the infrastructure that was there, but also bringing in, being able to create the infrastructure for that to come in, but also marketing it out to the studios to be able to move those productions to those sites. So that is something that is partly, it's feeding other dollars into the community there that is getting to other arts organizations through that. Not perfect, but it is one of those examples where if you really want to make that effort from that top line and put the dollars there, it will have an impact.
Ellen?
I was just about to say, I mean, we think about the number of organizations in Seattle that have artists on payroll. It is very few. It's us and it's the symphony. Scott, you probably have visual
We
artists
do,
on
yeah,
payroll.
yeah.
So, but you know, that's how lean we all are. That we are hiring people on a contractual basis as opposed to investing in groups of artists. It's incredibly expensive, but absolutely necessary in many ways.
Is what we're talking about too abstract for most people to understand? I think I look at public funding in the past for these major sort of moonshot initiatives, whether it was Forward Thrust with infrastructure in the 60s and 70s, or Seattle Center, create the World's Fair 65 years ago, or, light rail. I mean, those are all very tangible things like, building facilities. And what we're talking about here, it's not really facility driven. It's more of it's more complex than that. And I worry in an information economy where people are so distracted and they comment on things on social media without even reading what they're commenting on. And there's sort of this like, this sped up culture and digital culture, good and bad. I mean, all these things are various levels of gray to them. They're not black and white, but I just wonder, that seems like a big communications challenge, a perception challenge, to package all these things, because we're talking about a very diverse sector of the economy. When you say arts and culture, I mean, that's probably one of the most diverse sectors of the economy, if we look at it that way. But how do we make this more tangible for people? I'm worried that we're sort of just, because I've heard this notion of, we need more public funding for the arts. People need to understand, like when they were taking arts funding away from schools decades ago, and losing the school band and everything. How do we make what we're saying here understandable, digestible from the people who need to understand it? Because if you already get what we're talking about, you already get it.
Yeah.
But if you're some corporate person who suddenly has responsibility for corporate contributions, but you haven't been raised this way, or you haven't experienced arts the way all of us have, or if you're an elected official who is elected on a platform that has nothing to do with arts, it's only public safety, and you don't see the connection between public safety and culture and arts. I mean, we could all do this full time. You need an army to get this message across. I mean, I don't want to be a doom and gloom or doomsayer, but am I overstating how challenging what we're talking about is to accomplish?
Well, look, first of all, imagine our city without this sector. And that is doom and gloom. And I don't want to be that way. Instead, we should talk about what we contribute to this city in terms of jobs. What are we, 57,000 jobs across the state, Josh? I'm trying to remember that number. Huge number of jobs.
That's correct.
The multiplier affected neighborhoods that have an arts and culture organization in them. Look at the multiplier effect in your neighborhood, your part of downtown, Scott, just from Seattle Art Museum. Education impacts. You talk about arts programs being cut in schools. Guess who provides those? We do. We had a presentation last night at our board meeting from our director of community education, who talked about a boy who's been displaced multiple times, never took his hoodie off one time in school until the performance on our stage. The teachers had not seen his face. That's through a dance program in a school that otherwise probably has very little arts programming. We are providing those services. We all have accessibility programs for people with disabilities in our community. We are leading on racial equity and inclusion work. We are working, all of us, to be community assets and to be out in our communities, fostering human connection, understanding, education, good outcomes for kids. And so, not to be doom and gloom, but imagine our city without that. I mean, Josh, the impacts from Ailey Camp alone, how do you even measure those?
Yeah, thank you for that. And it sort of ties into I think a comment from Anita Shaw in the chat about the importance of ensuring our young people are exposed to arts and culture at an early age. And boy, I just couldn't agree more with that. And a lot of us work year round with students. And yes, we produce something called Ailey Camp that's in the summer, but I don't want to talk about my organization solely at all. The cool thing though is there is this opportunity, not the opportunity, it's a requirement, if I'm correct, Ellen, within Doors Open, that about 20% of the funds will need to be spent towards engaging public school kids all across King County, which will be hopefully a game changer for everyone's kids going to school in King County. They'll wind up having more field trips and hopefully helping exactly what Anita's the door that Anita's knocking on there. So I'm super excited by that.
Yeah.
And you know, I know I keep talking about the city, um, and indeed we do need to see you know, greater investment as I keep harping on, and also as Sarah Rathbone mentioned, we need some creative ways of finding some partnerships with the private sector too, to make that real. It's just let's see some leadership actually make some action. Meaning,
Well, it's always, we don't have the luxury anymore of letting the narrative of the city just unfold the way it naturally would have unfolded. I think that was true in the past, but unless you're actively taking a role in a city's narrative for what it represents, it gets away. I mean, there's a comment from Jenny in it's how people feel in a place. How does Seattle want to show arts and culture in a tangible way? What cities do we want to emulate? Paris, Detroit, etc. And that's, God, that's in some ways it's never been easier to create a narrative and spread a narrative about a place or a thing, right? In terms of the distribution of content. But it's also never been more difficult to control that narrative. But it seems like the critical mass is definitely in downtown Seattle for the city to be the kind of place that we all are proud of when it comes to arts and culture. That's the stuff that lasts. I mean, the businesses come and go. I mean, you know, I'm overstating that a little bit, but really it's the literature and the music and the performances. I still have vivid memories of going to when it was called Poncho Theater, the old, back when it was at Woodland Park Zoo.
Me too.
I remember I saw a production there of Diary of Anne Frank about when I was like third or fourth grade, and the ending where like it's so scary I can still close my eyes and see and hear that experience. That's probably 50 years ago, and I think we took it for granted for decades, and we took it for granted in the 90s even, and then we're just, because of the pandemic, exacerbating all these sort of existing things and these bigger societal changes, which Josh won't agree are really happening. Josh is living in his own little world, and we love him for it. It feels like I mean, if I was in Seattle, which I am, I would see this as a great opportunity to do something that other cities haven't been to be able to pull off. Seattle's had this notion of this ability to pull things off that no one thought we could pull off, whether it was the World's Fair 60 years ago, or the Goodwill Games 34 years ago, or just all sorts of examples in the past of doing things in a cool and innovative and creative way, not just in the arts, but in the way we were led civically and the way we were led by our elected officials. So it seems like there's this great opportunity. But it needs to be synthesized, it needs to be led, it needs to be communicated in a way that persuades the right people to get on board and to do this, not from some dictated narrative, but a shared narrative that's created together.
Yeah, I would love to see us make our own Edinburgh Festival and do something of that scale.
Something tangible, I think, would make sense. Something tangible to focus on.
Yeah, with everybody all in. Visual arts, local arts, traveling arts, dance, music, the whole thing. We are poised to do something that massive. We just got to go for it.
Well, Felix, you talked about the Goodwill Games. I mean, that was an infusion of incredible art into this city and amplifying the art that was already here.
Yeah, no, it takes both. It's always have to have something to work toward to really make everything coalesce.
Yeah.
And it feels to me that I think we can articulate the problem very clearly. The lack of funding, the lack of appreciation for what the sector, arts and culture sector, really does for the community now, and how critical it is for continuing downtown's revitalization. But how we all bring that together, and the story has to be told again, and it's not a one-time thing. This is for the duration. This is like you have to. You can't just say it once. Was it George Duff at the Chamber of Commerce used to say, it's a parade. It's like you have to tell your story again and again because it's just the people are going by all the time.
Yeah.
So I guess, it's got a couple of minutes left here. I want to ask each of you, give me something that you're hopeful about from this conversation today, and something you're looking forward to just arts and culture wise next coming year. So you got about half a minute each. You kind of give me kind of something, and go ahead, and Scott, we'll start with the new guy.
Sure. Well, thank you for this. I appreciate kind of being included and also being part of this conversation. It's a great time. I'm really excited to be here in Seattle. I think there is a ton that we can do going forward, and I'm excited to be part of that. What I'm excited about is I actually think in the years to come, how important the arts are going to be is being a place that people can come and get what they need. If that's to get away from the world for a while, that we can do that. If that's to find healing, that we can do that. If it's a place to have dialogue, we can be a place to have that. Are going to be incredibly important. And I think that's where we can have that outreach and really think about how we serve a need in our community. And that need changes from day to day. And how can we adapt, to that? I think part of it is support for the arts are directly linked to people finding value in it. And we need to be able to sell that value. And one of those things that was we mentioned around education that are a little bit of a struggle. People aren't getting it all the time in schools coming up. So it puts a different burden on us to be able, as adults, to be able to kind of really be able to have different entry points for people coming in to our various venues and really selling that point in the city. So the last thing is that we're having an Ai Weiwei show that we're going to be having that feels very on point. That'll be opening in March. That'll be up for 6 months. That'll bring in people from all over the world to come and see that exhibit. So I think there's an opportunity there, again, for us to continue that dialogue and also really adding to the economy here downtown.
Josh, you're next. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry there. I'm looking. I hope people take away from this conversation the extraordinary opportunities that we have in front of us. I am most excited in a big picture about pursuing new partnerships, nonprofit and for-profit collaborations moving into the future as a way of believing that growth is the right path to sustainability and chasing that. And then just in terms of some events that I'm excited about, I'm a giant fan of the band The Pixies. And we have 2 nights of The Pixies coming up later this spring at the Paramount. So I'm stoked about that. And I'm also really happy about we have Hamilton coming, and we're doing a giant student public school student matinee. And that's my favorite thing to do is watch the students watch Hamilton.
Very nice. Ellen?
Okay, well, first of all, Felix, thank you for convening us. DSA, thank you very much. And thanks for your hard questions, because this is real talk. I am looking forward to P&B's world premiere production of The Sleeping Beauty. It's the traditional steps reimagined in a contemporary, inclusive way. It's beautiful. And we have glass artist Preston Singletary, shout out to Sam, doing our scenic design. Paul Taswell is doing the costumes, and he did the costumes for Hamilton and the movie Wicked, among many other things. And so just illustrating that we are very interconnected in this sector. And it's going to be beautiful, and it premieres at the end of January. And please come see it.
All right. I want to thank our panelists, Josh LaBelle from Seattle Theater Group, Scott Stulen from Seattle Art Museum, and Ellen Walker from Pacific Northwest Ballet. I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this edition of DSA Virtual Access. And if you can, go to the DSA website and look at the Arts and Culture Coalition report. It's a really interesting document, definitely worth your time reading. I want to thank the fabulous DSA staff, want to wish everyone a great Thanksgiving and invite you to come downtown for the tree lighting and other festivities that are just 1 week from tomorrow, Friday, November 29th. Until then, I'm Felix Bonnell on behalf of DSA. Thanks again for joining us this morning, and we will see you downtown.